So, over the course of this semester, we have been extensively learning about various worldviews. And no matter how many times we were told not to concentrate on finding our worldview, there is no way I could get that prying question out of my head. I would sit in class and anticipate learning about each new worldview and wonder, maybe the next one will be just like me. Because let's face it, I'm not exactly the type to read ahead in the book to find that answer to the question myself. Not because the material wasn't interesting or anything, it's merely a laziness issue, I promise. Anyway, as the weeks progressed, I soon found that none of the worldviews matched my own, or at least my way of thinking. I did keep in mind the fact that no one can prescribe completely to one worldview, though. But I didn't even find myself aligning with one primary worldview and then having one or two secondary ones. I simply did not agree with any of them completely. Well, that's a bit of an overstatement. I agree with small bits and pieces of most of them, but mainly in equal proportions, so that none of them really dominated the others. So what I've decided to do is pick out all of the aspects of each worldview that I agree with, and make my own. I'm going to go through each of the worldviews we've discussed in class and list all the things about them that I would consider to be part of my own personal worldview. Let's start with myth. First of all, I am devoutly Christian. And Ford seems to draw a lot of connections between the mythic worldview and religion, and I have to say, I do agree with some of them. The first being that I, like someone within the mythic worldview, live my life according to a story, per se, that story being the Bible. I also believe that the reality of the here and now is secondary to my spiritual life, much like someone within the mythic worldview also believes. Finally, I know that my belief in Christ is the capital T truth, just like someone within the mythic worldview believes that their story is their capital T truth. But unlike someone within the mythic worldview, I have questioned it and I have stepped outside of the story that is the Bible before. But I always come back to Christianity. Next is archetypal psychology. I do believe that mostly everyone internally labels others according to known archetypes. I also think that archetypes might help explain why certain people find meaning in certain things. Let's take my mother, for example. I am 99% sure that if people identify with archetypes, my mother is definitely the caregiver. First of all, she is a medical assistant and always has to care for people at her work. Second, she also has a natural love for animals and will take in any hurt or harmed animals she sees and nurse them back to health. That's actually how we got our cat. She just never let him go once he was healthy. Finally, she is extremely overprotective of my brother and myself. Well, she's actually very nurturing. Overprotective could just be another word for it. And I'm pretty sure one of the places she finds meaning in her life is in taking care of others, which would definitely mean that she is the caregiver archetype. So in conclusion, I don't necessarily believe that archetypes define a person, but I do think that a lot of people might have archetypes within them. Philosophy. The first thing I agree with the philosophical worldview about is the fact that they question things in order to deepen their understanding. I think that the true way to attaining knowledge about other things is by actively learning about them, which does involve asking a lot of questions. But I also believe that at some point you should feel content with some of the answers. I also agree with the forms to an extent. I agree that there are commonalities between things that we deem to be, say, beautiful, but I do not necessarily agree that the beauty is located in some outside realm, as opposed to just inside the person or the flower. I feel like if you consider someone to be beautiful, that person is beautiful, and the beauty is within them. Now, the scientific worldview is a tricky one for me. I believe that science is useful, to an extent, as a worldview. Research and experimentation is very important because it helps solve many earthly problems. But I think that putting all of your trust and meaning into science and earthly things is a very limited way of living, because it ignores so much. So there's not a whole lot I'm really going to take from science and put into my own worldview. Now let's go to things I agree with from the postmodernism worldview. I believe that the way I perceive the world is only one of the countless ways it can be perceived, which is one of the primary tenets of the postmodern worldview. I also kind of agree that there can be many truths related to one situation. I personally believe that there can be many personal truths, because people perceive things differently, and it also depends on the person's context, like postmodernism says. But that, in the end, there does exist one factual truth. So that part strays a little bit from postmodernism, but it does involve one of its main concepts. Finally, I agree that the cultivation of multiple perspectives is immensely important. I think it is very important to listen to what other people have to say with an open mind. Even if I don't end up agreeing with them in the end, their opinions are still valid. Pragmatism. The main thing I want to pull from the pragmatic worldview is that it focuses equally on both the journey that is life and on the end goal, which I believe to be heaven. I believe that we are granted one life, and we should spend it to the best of our ability. But I also believe that we should live with the end goal in mind, and that is believing in Christ and looking forward to his heavenly gift. I also really like the aspect that the pragmatic mind believes that people add their own personal touches to the world and to reality. I agree, because I do not think that everyone can step foot on this earth without leaving a footprint. No, scratch that. You don't even have to step foot on this world, because even the unborn leave an impression on the world of their mothers. Everyone adds something to the world. And I really like that about the pragmatic worldview. Metaphysics. The primary tenet that I agree with from the metaphysical worldview is that one universal truth exists, but everyone has different perspectives of it. This sort of goes back to something I agreed with about postmodernism. I think that there is one universal, factual truth that exists, but everyone interprets and perceives that truth in different ways, which I think creates countless personal truths. Now, I know that the metaphysical worldview doesn't base its universal truth on facts, but rather it bases it off of hierarchy and attaining higher levels of abilities, but I'm just drawing off of the concept. Finally, naturalism. Now, the main thing I think I adopt from the naturalistic worldview is deriving happiness from the small, simple things in life. Because I honestly do take joy in overlooking a meadow full of flowers, or drinking a cup of hot coffee every morning, or cutting the tags off of a new pair of jeans. Now, I do not necessarily find meaning in these things, but I definitely value them and they make me happy. So, there you have it. My own personal worldview constructed to the best of my ability from bits and pieces of the worldviews we have learned about in class. I guess you could call it the myth, arc, phyllis, science, post-pragmata, naturalistic worldview? Never mind. That was kind of dumb. For right now, I'm just gonna say that this is my worldview and call it a night. Thank you so much for listening!